Hi everyone and welcome to the University of Law podcast. I'm Darren Broad and I studied my LLB law degree at the University of Law Bristol campus, and I am now studying my LPC MSc at the University of Law Moorgate campus. Welcome to the first episode of our Everything You Need to Know When Starting at the University of Law series. Now today I'm joined by Steve Eagle to discuss finance advice and budgeting at the University of Law. Hi Steve, would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi, I'm Steve. I'm one of the two money and housing advisors for the University of Law, and I'm very long in the tooth, so I've been working in student financial advice for over a quarter of a century now. Not at University of Law all that time, I should hasten to add. I've been here 2 years. Previously, I've worked for University of Brighton and University of Sussex Students' Unions.
Brilliant. Well, it's great to have you on the episode today. If that's all right, we'll jump straight in with the first question.
Yeah, sure. Brilliant.
So the first one we've got is that the cost of living has been cited as one of the main concerns that students have this year. And we've got 79% of students wanting help with budgeting and planning finances. So what tools does a university offer to help support with this?
So, okay, in terms of top tips in terms of managing your finances, best thing really is to draw up a budget, and that's going to make you feel more in control of your financial situation. And a budget is essentially a list of your incoming, so money that you've got coming in, and your expenditure. And there are lots of different ways that you can create a budget. So there's the very old school way of just using a pen and paper. I'm a very old school person.
I think I am too, yeah.
That's what I would do. Through to using a spreadsheet. So we're gradually kind of moving through the technological ages. There are lots of free apps that you can use as well. There's some really good free ones. And a great website with lots of information on drawing up a budget and budgeting tools and the best free budgeting apps is the moneysavingexpert.com website. And that was set up by Martin Lewis. So Martin Lewis is the broadcaster, journalist and campaigner. And on the Money Saving Expert website, there's a section specifically for students. So I would say that is probably the best resource that we've found out there that can help budget. Loads and loads of tips on how to increase your income, how to reduce your expenditure. And I think the key with a budget is that your income needs to be equal to or greater than your expenditure. If it's not, then you need to look at ways of increasing your income and also reducing your expenditure. And essentially the main way of increasing your income, it sounds sort of horribly obvious, but it is the best way. And that's to work, or to work more if you are currently working. However, there may be other sources of income that you can tap into. So that could be scholarships and bursaries, university hardship funds, for example. Most full-time students aren't eligible for welfare benefits, but for the groups of full-time student who are eligible to claim benefits, ourselves in the Money and Housing Advice team, we can help work out if you're eligible and work out if you're getting the right amount of in benefits. And it's also worth knowing that part-time students, they may be able to claim welfare benefits. Again, we can advise on that.
Yeah.
There's lots of information on the university website as well. So there's a whole cost of living section on the university website. So that's really, really worth checking out. And I'm not saying that entirely because I wrote it, but it's got some really good info on there about how to increase your income and reduce expenditure. And there's also university support, which might be something that, we'll come on to discuss in terms of hardship funding. In terms of ways of reducing expenditure, then probably the best thing to do is to literally think about everything you spend and ask yourself, do I need it? And can I afford it? And if the answer to both or either of those is no, then don't buy it.
Yeah.
Again, it sounds horribly obvious, but it is quite an effective way of just trying to keep a rein on on your expenditure. Clearly, there are certain things you can't get away with not paying. So rent always needs to be a priority. Paying your utility bills so you don't get your gas and electric cut off. Paying council tax if you're liable. Most full-time students aren't liable. But beyond that, I think a lot of our economy depends on a whole range of unnecessary consumption. So without being too sort of flippant about it, I think it's about being countercultural in a way and just saying no to needless spending. So, do you really need that expensive hot drink from a cafe? Do you really need that snack? Do you really need to buy that takeaway? Never buy bottled water. There's stuff it comes free from a tap, or if it's not free, you're paying for it through water rates. And it's also thinking about things that like Amazon Prime subscriptions, Disney Plus, etc., etc., etc. Do you need those subscriptions? So there are small things that you can do which sometimes can feel a bit like, I've heard it described as the school of money advice, which is a way to save money on energy bills is to kind of jump up and down to keep warm, or wear a jumper, jogging on the spot. And so it can feel a little bit like that. But these small savings can add up and they will help. I think it's also about doing things like taking advantage of student discounts, so travel discounts, for example. Also thinking about things like, do you really need to buy new? So do you really need to buy new technology? There's lots of good deals on refurbished technology, refurbished phones, laptops, etc. And they can be really good value for money. And there's a few other things that's really worth knowing about. So you can reduce spending on health-related costs like sight tests, glasses, dental treatment, prescriptions even, through the NHS low-income scheme. If you're aged 19 or over, then you're not automatically exempt from paying NHS charges, but you might qualify for help on the grounds of low income, and that can be full or partial exemption. And I mentioned council tax earlier, and so just to reiterate, if you're a full-time student, you're generally not liable to pay council tax, but your local authority will want to see proof of your student status. Yeah. So you can get that from your campus student information office. And again, as I said earlier, that there's lots of tips on the ULaw website cost of living pages, so they're really worth checking out. Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. I mean, going off the back of what you said earlier, I remember when I moved out for my postgraduate course, I opened up a student bank account, because they were offering £80 just to do it. And I've done a few other bank switches because I'm a bit like that. But also because then that's where I'm very lucky to have a grant from my law firm, but that's where that money went. And then all my my shopping, my bills, everything came out of that. And my part-time job, all my wages went into that. And it was sort of an account that moved that I could manage then. And then my main bank account I had before, which, I'm very fortunate to have, some savings. It sort of allowed that to stay sort of where it is for the time being. So
yes, student bank accounts, they're really worth investigating, and several reasons for that. So one is that banks may offer you an inducement to open an account with them, as you've mentioned. My advice really would be to probably ignore those inducements, and what might be of more benefit is to find out what interest-free overdraft the bank account may offer. We really don't want to be encouraging people to use overdrafts, but they can be a useful tool if you're coming, say, near to the end of term. You may need to use that overdraft facility. And the great thing with student bank accounts is they do offer an interest-free overdraft facility. What they offer does vary from bank to bank, and you don't have an automatic right to it, but it's very common. Yeah. Again, the moneysavingexpert.com website, every year it's around about September time, it will produce information about all the major banks and the inducements that they're offering people and the size of the interest-free overdraft. So really worth checking out. Student bank account can be a great idea. One note of caution with an interest-free overdraft is at some point it will cease to be interest-free. So at some point after you graduate, if you're still carrying that overdraft, then the bank will start to charge interest. So you need to watch out for that.
Of course.
But it can be a really helpful short-term tool if you're having some cash flow issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So the second question that we had is, what support is there available at the university if a student suddenly needs financial support?
Okay, so I mentioned earlier that there are university hardship funds, so I'll talk a little bit more about those now. There are two main funds that the university runs: the Financial Assistance Fund and the Digital Hardship Fund. The Financial Assistance Fund can help with difficulties meeting daily living costs. Currently, the maximum payment that a student can get from the Financial Assistance Fund is £2,000 per academic year if you're a full-time student, £1,000 if you're a part-time student. The fund is discretionary, so payments aren't guaranteed, and we do have a pretty strict assessment process. But there absolutely is money there to give to students in financial hardship. And we would really strongly encourage you to apply to the funds if you are in financial difficulties. It's really, really worth a shot. The Digital Hardship Fund, that provides help towards the costs of buying essential IT equipment for your course. So that could be a laptop, printer, noise-cancelling headphones, for example. And it's available to students who have a household income below £43,000 a year and who can't afford the equipment themselves. Details of the university's hardship funds are on Elite. It can be a little bit difficult to find on Elite, I have to say, but it is there. It is there. And you apply via the external Black Bullion platform. So that's blackbullion.com. Black Bullion, we don't only use it to administer the hardship funds, it also has a range of useful resources on the site. So lots of tips about, again, how to increase your income, reduce your expenditure, ways of budgeting, etc. So even if you're not necessarily applying for the hardship funds, it's a good site to check out. And the application process for the hardship funds, it's relatively straightforward. It's all online. We do ask you to upload certain pieces of evidence. So, for example, for both the Financial Assistance Fund and the Digital Hardship Fund, we'll ask you to upload the most recent 2 months bank statements for all your accounts. But it's very clear when you go into the site and when you apply as to what evidence you need to supply.
Then moving on to the next question, and I mean, we have touched on a few of these so far, so I guess this is more sort of anything you'd like to add, is that do you have any budgeting tips or ways to save for students?
Okay, so I've mentioned
absolutely
quite a lot already, but some other ones perhaps that it's worth bearing in mind. I'm sure a lot of you will do this anyway, but it's thinking about things like buying supermarket own brands rather than the branded equivalent. They will be cheaper and there's unlikely to be much difference in terms of taste. So your supermarket baked beans are unlikely to be much different from a branded type of baked bean. And also think about things like, can you switch to a cheaper contract for things such as your broadband supplier, your mobile phone supplier? We do see quite a lot of students who are paying a lot of money on mobile contracts. And the mobile phone companies are kind of, they do like to offer vast amounts of data in order to justify these higher monthly charges. So I think if your contract is coming to an end or has come to an end, then it's really, really worth looking to see if you can save money on a new contract. And you probably can, to be very honest. In terms of the amount of data, most of us don't need, like 100 gig a month. It's just totally unnecessary, really. So there can be ways there that will be helpful. And again, I think just going back to how to budget, I can't recommend moneysavingexpert.com highly enough.
It's a great website.
Absolutely. In terms of the budgeting apps that they recommend, all sorts of tips, they're updating it all the time. It's great. It's great. So make that website your friend, even if you find Martin Lewis, as I do, sometimes a little bit nauseating. It can be. He can be so good. But the website, absolutely fantastic. Really worth checking out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going off what you said earlier about essentially, the best way to do it is increase your expenditure. I think, sorry, not your expenditure, your income, increasing your income. I think one of the things I've done, which I'm really glad I've done, was become a student ambassador at the University of Law. So it's one of the part-time roles they offer, and it's paid at the national living wage, which increases when the National Living Wage Society move that up each year. And it's been a really great way to work flexibly around my studies. I've also taken on the role of marketing ambassador, which is why I'm sat here, talking with you today, taking on lots of opportunities like this. So it's been a great way, obviously, to, gain transferable skills, etc., but also earn a little bit of money alongside my studies.
That's really, really good points. There are a number of ambassador schemes at the university. And in fact, at most universities will have something similar. But they can be, fantastic ways of earning a bit more extra money. And every little bit really does help, really will help, as well as giving you great skills, experience, etc., etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next question we've had is, how can students find somewhere to live when coming to the University of Law, essentially?
Okay. I think it's important to know from the outset that the University of Law doesn't have any of its own accommodation, but the university does provide help in order to find accommodation. So there is a really friendly accommodation team at the university. And what they can do is give you access to the student pad database of properties that are available to rent in the private rented sector. And they can also give you a range of options in the city in which you're studying. So really worth getting in touch with the accommodation team. The university also has some partnerships with accommodation providers. And if you're a first year undergraduate, then you can take advantage of those relationships, as it were. There's information on the university website about that. With the accommodation office, best way to get in touch with them is to drop them an email, accommodation@law.ac.uk. So nice and easy. So yes, although we don't provide our own accommodation, there is a lot of help available in finding accommodation.
Yeah. And I think for UK students especially, the fact that we have campuses located all around the country can mean that a lot of people live at home. I know I did throughout my undergraduate degree and commuted into university. And, I know it's not an option for everyone and a lot of people want to move out. But for me, living at home for those 3 years has probably saved me a lot of money.
Yeah, it's if you can do it.
Yeah.
And if you're comfortable doing it,
absolutely.
And if it's a practical option, then it really will save you a significant amount of money, because there is no getting around the fact that accommodation currently in the UK is very expensive and there is a limited supply. So it will save you an awful lot of money if you can live at home while studying.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've also received a few questions from listeners on our various social media channels. So one of them was what funding options are available sort of beyond student finance?
Okay, it's quite limited. We need to be honest. So there are scholarships and bursaries, both that the university offers and available externally. The important thing to know about scholarships and bursaries is in the great majority of cases, you need to apply for them before you start your course. So there are a wide range, both for undergraduate and postgraduates. And in fact, the university is also introducing a new bursary for undergraduates, for new undergraduates who are starting from September 2023. It's for students from lower income households, and there's £1,000 a year bursary for undergraduate students.
Oh, brilliant.
There are some sort of terms and conditions associated with that. Information is on the university website. So scholarships and bursaries can be an option, but apply for those before starting your course. There are also private loan providers, so they can be an option worth investigating if you're not eligible for student finance or if it's not sufficient. Big note of caution with private loan providers, though. They're not providing you with a loan out of the goodness of their hearts, or they may be lovely people, but they're doing it to make a profit from you. So you really need to be aware of the terms and conditions of any loan that they offer you. So you'll be wanting to know what the interest rate is and the repayment details, because you may find that you're having to repay that loan whilst you're studying instead of after you've finished your course, as is the case with funding available from the UK's student finance bodies. So those are the main options, really. I think, without being overly negative, if you think funding is going to be a problem for you, then it's far better not to start a course until you are in a position where you're confident that you have the money available. Because if you start a course without the funding in place, then what can happen is that ultimately you may have to withdraw from that course because you're not able to pay the tuition fees, or you're not able to meet your living expenses. And you may find that you'll have no qualification to show for it at the end of the day. So I think if you are worried about money and whether you've got enough for your fees and living expenses before starting your course, I think just have a serious think about whether now is the best time for you to start. Because there are scholarships available, but the process of applying for them might take some time and might require some patience. So, yes, I'm not saying it's unaffordable, but you do need to plan your finances carefully.
I think a good takeaway from that as well is everyone's journey to where they want to get is different, and I think the average age of a qualifying solicitor is 29. So don't feel like you have to start this postgraduate course right now, because otherwise I'm going to be years behind everyone else. Good point. Take your own journey, essentially. If you need to, I guess work for a few years or do something else,
absolutely so.
It's fine.
Absolutely so. Fine. Absolutely so. And I would also say that part-time postgraduate study can be a much more realistic option for a lot of people rather than studying full-time. Because if you study part-time, that gives you more opportunity to work alongside your studies. And also, as I alluded to earlier, potentially you might be eligible for means-tested benefits like universal credit if you're on a low income or if you have no income. So part-time study, really worth looking at, And in the scheme of things, maybe taking one extra year to qualify really won't make any difference.
Absolutely not. Fantastic. I think the final point we had, you may have touched on a few areas of this, but what source of funding is available for international students? Because I know we have a generally really diverse cohorts across our campuses.
Okay. So again, it's limited for international students, and that will be the same at any UK higher education institution. Having said that, there absolutely are scholarships and bursaries available to international students. Anything that the university offers will be on the university website. And beyond that, there's good information on the British Council website about potential scholarships. And actually, there's a website, Save the Student. And on that, although it has some information that is maybe not, it can be a little bit flippant.
Yeah.
They've got a great section for international students on how to find a scholarship.
Yeah.
So there is some great information there as well.
So a survey from a student room has suggested that 45% of students admitted that they really struggle with actually the process of obtaining student finance. Could you maybe demystify this process for our listeners a little bit?
Okay, sure. So essentially, the main way that you apply for student finance is online. If you're an undergraduate, then the best place to look for information about how to apply for student finance is the government website. So if you go to gov.uk/student-finance, then that tells you everything that you need to know about the student finance system if you're an undergraduate, and also gives you the link to set up a student finance account and to actually make your application. And applications generally open from about March of the year in which you want to start university. So if you're starting university in September 2023, then applications would have opened in March. You've got quite a lot of time to apply for your student funding. So student finance, say that if you apply by, I think it's the end of May, then they say, your student funding should all be in place for the start of term. However, you actually can apply up to 9 months after the start of your course for student finance. So it is possible to start your course without having got any of your student funding in place. We wouldn't recommend that, but but you can start without having your student funding in place, and you'd still be okay to apply for it as long as you're doing so before the end of May of your academic year if it starts in September. For postgraduates, then again, the government website is the best place to go, and that's gov.uk/masters-loan. And that gives you, again, the details of the funding that's on offer and how to set up a student finance account. In terms of what you're actually offered, it does depend upon which nation in the UK you're living in. So, for example, if you're a student from Wales, then there is a slightly different funding package available than if you're a student from England or a student from Northern Ireland or a student from Scotland. But the government website gives the relevant links to the different student finance authorities for the different nations of the UK. For postgraduate funding, applications open a little later. So generally speaking, applications for postgraduate funding open in about May of the year in which you want to start your postgraduate course. And I won't go into any great detail about the eligibility requirements for student funding, other really than to say the two main elements of eligibility are that the course has to be eligible and there are certain residency requirements that you have to meet. And then with undergraduate funding, broadly speaking, part of that funding a student can get regardless of their household income. So for example, if you're a student from England, then you can get a tuition fee loan for help towards your fees, regardless of your household income. And you can get part of a loan for living costs, regardless of your household income. And by household income, very broadly, we're talking about the income of your parents if you're under 25. If you're aged over 25, then really it's only the income of any partner that you live with that's taken into account. If, for example, you have no contact with either of your parents, or if you are a care experienced student, then you may be able to be classed as being independent of your parents.
Yeah.
And so your parents won't be asked for their income details because there's an additional part of the maintenance loan that you can get depending upon your household income. For postgraduate funding, that's generally not assessed on household income. So, for example, the postgraduate master's loan from Student Finance England, a student can get that regardless as to their household income. So very, very broadly, that's how it works. gov.uk website is the place to look.
Brilliant. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our questions, but thank you so much for joining us today, Steve.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.